I discovered a 2 out of 10 husband scorecard hidden in her drawer. I withdraw my provision, froze the money, and demand counseling or a hard reset. The scorecard was hidden inside her bedside drawer, neatly organized in a purple folder. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for our insurance papers while she was visiting her sister for the weekend. What I found instead was a meticulously detailed marriage equality scorecard with categories ranging from emotional support to household duties. My score, a humiliating 2 out of 10 with red ink comments about my patriarchal expectations and provider syndrome. 5 years of marriage reduced to a failing grade on a sheet she'd apparently been updating weekly. The date on the top showed she'd been doing this for 6 months. 6 months of smiling at me across the dinner table while secretly tallying my failures. 6 months of making love while harboring this growing resentment. The betrayal hit like ice water. Even worse, at the bottom of the page was a note, discussed with book club. All agree this assessment is generous. She'd been sharing this degrading evaluation with her friends. They'd been laughing about it while drinking wine and discussing romance novels. I photographed every page, placed everything back exactly as I found it, and walked calmly to my home office. The initial shock gave way to cold clarity. For months, I'd been sensing her growing contempt, the eye rolls when I mentioned work stress, the dismissive tone when I suggested weekend plans, the constant comparisons to her friends' husbands. Looking back, all the signs were there. 3 months ago, she'd started a new job that paid considerably less than mine, but suddenly gave her a platform to complain about carrying more than her share. Never mind that I covered 80% of our expenses, or that I'd supported her through 2 career changes. I sat at my desk and began making notes of my own, not in anger, but with strategic precision. This wasn't about revenge, it was about recalibration. If she wanted to score our marriage, then perhaps it was time to show her exactly what a 2 out of 10 provider looked like in practice. First, I called my financial advisor and scheduled an urgent meeting. Then, I reviewed our joint accounts and documented every expense pattern. Finally, I drafted a new monthly budget, one that reflected my apparently subpar contribution to our partnership. No dramatic confrontations, no emotional outbursts, just quiet, deliberate action. When she returned Sunday evening, I greeted her with the same affection I always had. She had no idea I'd seen her scorecard, or that I'd spent the weekend restructuring our financial landscape. She kissed me and asked if I'd missed her. I smiled and said I'd been productive in her absence that night. As she slept beside me, I reflected on her scorecard. The category that bothered me most wasn't emotional support or even sexual satisfaction, both of which she'd rated dismally low. It was financial partnership, where she'd written, takes provider role as excuse to control decisions. Expects gratitude for doing the bare minimum. Score, 2 out of 10. After 5 years of working 60-hour weeks to build our life together, after postponing my own dreams so she could explore hers. This was her assessment. Well, if 2 out of 10 was my score as a provider, perhaps it was time to show her what that actually meant. Not out of spite, but out of self-respect. I didn't sleep much that night. Instead, I planned. By morning, I knew exactly how this would unfold. The scorecard had revealed more than just her dissatisfaction. It had exposed a fundamental disrespect that could no longer be ignored. And unlike her secret evaluations, my response would be transparent, measured, and impossible to misinterpret. Monday morning arrived with new purpose. I left for work earlier than usual, telling her I had an important meeting. In reality, I headed straight to my bank to open a new personal account. The joint accounts we'd shared since our wedding would remain, but from now on, my primary income would flow elsewhere. At lunch, I met with my financial advisor. He raised an eyebrow when I explained my situation but remained professional. "We can restructure your investments and redirect your upcoming bonus," he assured me. "But may I suggest marriage counseling before making drastic changes?" I appreciated his concern but declined. This wasn't a hasty reaction. It was a strategic realignment. We spent the next hour reorganizing my portfolio, removing her as a beneficiary from non-essential policies and creating a new financial framework that would protect my core assets. That evening, I subtly observed her behavior. She complained about her day, barely asking about mine. When I mentioned a colleague's promotion, she cut me off to talk about office politics at her workplace. Dinner conversation revolved entirely around her frustrations, with occasional criticisms tossed my way like breadcrumbs. I nodded attentively, documenting this pattern mentally. After dinner, she disappeared into her study, where I knew she'd be texting with her book club friends, the same women who thought her assessment was generous. I used this time to review her scorecard categories again through the photos I'd taken. The more I examined them, the more I realized how skewed her perceptions had become. Under household duties, she'd written, expects praise for basic tasks like taking out trash, never notices when I clean. Yet I'd been the one handling yard work, home repairs, and vehicle maintenance without complaint. I'd installed shelves, fixed leaky faucets, and spent weekends on home improvement projects. Apparently, those didn't count on her scorecard. Throughout the week, I maintained our normal routine on the surface while methodically implementing my plan. I canceled our upcoming vacation, citing work obligations when in reality I'd rerouted those funds to my new account. I quietly removed her as an authorized user on my premium credit card, the one she used for her salon visits and shopping sprees. By Friday, I created my own objective scorecard documenting our actual contributions to the household with cold, hard numbers, financial input, hours spent on household maintenance, emotional support instances. Each category painted a dramatically different picture than her subjective assessment. When she suggested an expensive dinner that weekend, I calmly replied, I thought we could cook at home instead. I'm trying to be more financially responsible. The look of surprise on her face was subtle but unmistakable. Since when do you worry about restaurant bills? She asked with a slight edge to her voice. I've been reviewing our finances, I replied casually. Just making some adjustments. Her eyes narrowed slightly, but she didn't press further. That night, she tried initiating intimacy, something that had become increasingly rare. I gently declined, citing exhaustion from work. The confusion on her face told me she was starting to sense the shift. Saturday morning, I woke early and made coffee. While she slept, I removed my valuable watch collection from our shared safe and relocated it to a secure location. Not out of pettiness, but practicality. According to her scorecard, I scored a pathetic 1 out of 10 for respecting boundaries. Ironic, considering she'd been documenting and sharing private details of our marriage without my knowledge. By the time she awoke, I was reviewing investment reports at the kitchen table. She poured herself coffee and asked what I was doing. Just some financial planning, I replied with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I've realized lately that I need to reevaluate my priorities. The weeks that followed would reveal just how serious I was about that reevaluation. The provider who scored 2 out of 10 was methodically withdrawing his provision, not with dramatic flourish, but with calculated precision, and soon she would begin to notice the difference. 2 weeks into my recalibration plan, the first cracks appeared in her carefully maintained facade. It started when her premium credit card was declined during a shopping trip with her friends. She called me, voice tense with embarrassment. There must be some mistake with the card, she said, the artificial sweetness in her tone barely masking her irritation. No mistake, I replied calmly. I removed you as an authorized user. I thought you'd have received the notification. A long pause followed. You what? Why would you do that without discussing it first? I'm reassessing our financial arrangement, I explained, my voice level and controlled. Since we're apparently not equal partners, I'm making adjustments accordingly. What are you talking about? Her voice had lost its sweetness entirely now. We can discuss it when you get home. Enjoy the rest of your day. I ended the call before she could respond. That evening, she stormed into the house, cheeks flushed with indignation. You humiliated me in front of everyone, she hissed. The card was declined, and I had to call my friend to cover for me. I looked up from my laptop with measured calm. I'm sorry you felt humiliated. That wasn't my intention. Then what exactly was your intention? And what did you mean about not equal partners? I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention. I've been thinking about equity in our relationship, about fair contributions and expectations, and you decided canceling my card was the solution. Her voice rose in disbelief. It's not canceled, it's just no longer linked to my account, I clarified. You have your own income now, your own career that you're passionate about. I thought you'd appreciate the independence. Her expression shifted from anger to calculation. Is this about money? Are you having financial problems you haven't told me about? Not at all, I assured her. My finances are excellent. I'm simply reevaluating what a fair contribution looks like in our marriage. She sat down across from me, changing tactics. Look, if this is about me getting a job, I thought you supported that. It's not like I'm making what you make. It's not about the amount, I replied. It's about the principle, about recognition and respect for what each of us brings to this partnership. A flicker of unease crossed her face. What exactly are you saying? I maintained steady eye contact. I'm saying that when someone consistently rates their partner's contribution as subpar, perhaps that partner should adjust their contribution to match the rating. Her face went pale. What are you talking about? What rating? I could have confronted her directly about the scorecard, but that would have shifted the power dynamic. Instead, I shrugged slightly. We all keep score in relationships, don't we? Consciously or unconsciously. I've just decided to acknowledge the scoring system and adjust accordingly. She fell silent, clearly working through implications. Finally, she attempted a reconciliatory approach. I think we're having a miscommunication. Whatever you think I've done, I don't think you've done anything, I interrupted smoothly. I'm simply responding to reality. Actions have consequences. Perceptions shape relationships. If my contribution as a provider is perceived as insufficient, then I should scale it to meet that perception. This isn't like you, she said, voice softening with calculated concern. You've never been petty about money. It's not pettiness, I corrected her. It's precision. And you're right, this isn't like me. I'm evolving. The following day, she discovered I'd canceled our anniversary vacation to Bali. The booking confirmation email had been replaced with a cancellation notice. She confronted me that evening, waving her phone in my face. You canceled our anniversary trip without even discussing it with me. I nodded. I did. I've decided to use those funds differently. For what? She demanded. Personal investments, I replied simply. This is childish, she snapped. If you're upset about something, we should talk about it like adults. I leaned back in my chair. I'm not upset. I'm adapting. There's a difference. Adapting to what? Frustration edged her voice. The reality of our relationship, I explained calmly. To your expectations and assessments. A flash of understanding and fear crossed her face. She left the room without another word. That night, I heard her on the phone with someone. Voice hushed but urgent. I think he knows. No, I don't know how. What should I do? Pause. That won't work with him. You don't understand. He's different now. I smiled to myself in the darkness. Different indeed. The man who had accepted a 2 out of 10 was gone. In his place stood someone who understood his value and was prepared to demonstrate exactly what she stood to lose when she failed to recognize it. The breaking point came when she tried accessing our joint savings account for a girls' weekend in Miami. Her expression as she stared at her phone told me everything. She discovered the account balance was significantly lower than expected. Why is there only $3,000 in our savings? She demanded, storming into my home office without knocking. I looked up from my work calmly. I moved some funds to more productive investments. Without telling me, that's our joint money. Her voice pitched higher with each word. Correction, that was excess from my contributions. I've calculated exactly what proportion you've contributed and left that amount untouched. She stared at me, momentarily speechless. What's gotten into you lately? First the credit card, then the vacation, now this. Are you punishing me for something? I set my pen down deliberately. Not punishing, realigning. There's a fundamental disconnect in how we view this marriage that needs addressing. What disconnect? You're the one suddenly changing all the rules. I stood up slowly. It's time we had a proper conversation about this. Sit down. Something in my tone must have registered because she hesitated, then took a seat across from my desk. I reached into a drawer and removed a folder identical to her purple one, but in black. I placed it between us. 3 weeks ago, I found your marriage equality scorecard while looking for insurance documents. I kept my voice neutral, stating facts rather than accusations. You've been rating me as a husband for 6 months, sharing those ratings with your friends, and never once bringing your concerns to me directly. Her face drained of color. You went through my private things. Finding your scorecard was accidental. What I did afterward was deliberate. I opened the folder, revealing my own meticulously documented assessment. This is my response. An objective record of our contributions to this marriage backed by financial data, time allocation, and concrete examples. She stared at the documents, speechless. According to your scorecard, I'm a 2 out of 10 as a provider, so I've adjusted my financial provision to reflect that rating. You scored me 1 out of 10 for respecting boundaries while sharing intimate details of our marriage with your book club. Interesting double standard. You don't understand, she finally managed. The scorecard was just a venting exercise. My therapist suggested don't. My voice cut through her excuse sharply. Don't insult my intelligence by claiming this was therapeutic. Therapy builds bridges. This was designed to burn them. She shifted tactics. Okay, maybe I was frustrated, but this reaction is extreme. Cutting off access to our finances, canceling trips. This feels controlling. I laughed, not bitterly but with genuine amusement. Now that's ironic. You create a system to control and evaluate my behavior without my knowledge. And when I respond by controlling my own resources, I'm the controlling one. That's not what I meant. Here's what's actually happening, I interrupted, my voice level but firm. You decided I was failing as a husband without giving me the opportunity to address your concerns. You shared that assessment with others. undermining my dignity. Now you're experiencing the natural consequence of undervaluing a partner's contribution, the withdrawal of that contribution. Her eyes narrowed. So, this is about your ego. You're hurt that I criticized you. No, this is about honesty and respect, both of which have been lacking from your side of this marriage. I'm not hurt. I'm awake. I slid a document toward her. These are my terms moving forward. Option 1. We separate our finances completely and permanently. You pay exactly 50% of all household expenses. No access to my accounts, credit, or investments. Option 2. We attend marriage counseling where you explain your scorecard to a professional and we rebuild with complete transparency. She glanced at the paper and back at me. And if I refuse both options? Then option 3, I replied coolly. I contact a divorce attorney tomorrow morning. You'd throw away 5 years over this. Her voice quavered slightly. I'm not the one who reduced 5 years to a failing grade on a scorecard. You decided this marriage was worth a 2 out of 10. I'm simply responding accordingly. She picked up the document, hands slightly unsteady. I need time to think. You have until tomorrow evening, I replied, standing to signal our conversation was over. I've already given this 3 weeks of thought, which is 3 weeks more consideration than you gave before judging me. As she left my office, I noticed something I hadn't seen in months, a glimmer of genuine respect in her eyes, buried beneath the shock and anger. Whether this marriage survived or not, one thing was certain. She would never again mistake my composure for weakness, or my provision for obligation. She didn't wait until the next evening. At 3 a.m., I awoke to find her sitting at the edge of our bed, crying quietly in the darkness. I remained still, observing. These tears could be genuine remorse or calculated manipulation. I'd wait to determine which. I know you're awake, she whispered. Please talk to me. I sat up but maintained distance. It's the middle of the night. Whatever you need to say can wait until morning. I can't sleep. I can't stop thinking about everything. I turned on the bedside lamp, illuminating her tear-streaked face. Then speak your piece. The scorecard was wrong, she began. I was being influenced by my friends. They're all into this relationship equality workshop thing, and I got caught up in it. It wasn't really how I feel about you. I studied her expression. So, you're saying you lied on the scorecard or you're lying now? She flinched. Neither. I just wasn't being fair. I was focusing on negatives and ignoring all the good things. And sharing this unfair assessment with your friends seemed appropriate because they were sharing theirs too. It became this competitive thing, like who could find the most flaws in their husband. She looked down. It was toxic. I see that now. You see it now because there are consequences, I pointed out. Not because you had some moral epiphany. That's not true, she protested weakly. I love you. I've always loved you. Love without respect is meaningless, I replied. And respect isn't something you feel. It's something you demonstrate through actions. Your actions have shown profound disrespect. She moved closer. I'll fix this. I'll do whatever it takes. That brings us back to the 3 options I presented. She reached for my hand. I allowed the contact but didn't reciprocate. I don't want separate finances and I don't want divorce. I'll do the counseling. I nodded. I'll schedule a session this week. Can't we just work through this ourselves? I'm admitting I was wrong. You're admitting it at 3 a.m. in private when faced with serious consequences. That's not accountability. It's damage control. I withdrew my hand. Counseling is non-negotiable. The next morning, she left for work earlier than usual. By noon, I received an email notification that she had attempted to transfer funds from another joint account we maintained, the one I hadn't yet restructured. I immediately called the bank and froze the account. Prevention, not punishment. She called minutes later, voice tight with frustration. You froze our joint checking account too, after you attempted an unauthorized transfer? Yes, I was just moving money to pay some bills, she claimed. Which bills specifically? I asked calmly. Just regular bills, utilities and stuff. Interesting. Since I paid all the utilities last week, as I always do. I kept my tone matter of fact. The truth would be more efficient here. A pause. Fine. I was transferring money to my personal account as a precaution. You've been acting unpredictably and I'm scared. No, you're not scared. You're adapting just as I have been. The difference is I'm being transparent about it. That evening, she returned with takeout from my favorite restaurant and wine I particularly enjoyed. She'd styled her hair the way I preferred and wore the dress from our 3rd anniversary. The calculated effort was almost impressive. I thought we could have a nice dinner, she suggested with a tentative smile. Talk things through calmly. I accepted the dinner but maintained emotional distance. As we ate, she attempted every reconciliation tactic in her arsenal. First came nostalgia, reminiscing about our early days together. Then vulnerability, sharing insecurities about her career and friendships. Finally, physical affection, touching my arm, leaning in closer. I acknowledged each approach with polite attention, but didn't engage emotionally. When she finally realized these strategies weren't working, frustration broke through her carefully constructed facade. "What do you want from me?" she demanded. "I've apologized. I've agreed to counseling. I'm trying here. What I want is exactly what I stated yesterday. Accountability and respect, not performance or placation." "This feels like punishment," she complained. "It's not punishment, it's consequence. There's a distinction." I set down my fork. Punishment seeks to hurt. Consequence seeks to correct. I have no interest in hurting you, but I won't shield you from the natural results of your choices either. So, what now? We live like strangers until some therapist gives you permission to forgive me? I looked at her directly. We live like two adults confronting a serious breach of trust. And whether I forgive you isn't the immediate issue. It's whether we can rebuild something worth continuing. Later that night, I heard her on the phone again. Her whispered conversation drifted under the door of my home office where I'd been sleeping since our confrontation. "He's not budging. No, he's not angry. That's what's unnerving. It's like he's completely detached." "No, that won't work. I already tried. I think I really messed up this time." Her friend's advice wasn't working because it was designed for manipulation of a man who still operated from the need for approval. That man was gone. In his place stood someone who understood his value wasn't determined by her scorecard, and who wouldn't accept anything less than the full respect that value commanded. Our first counseling session revealed everything. The therapist, a measured, insightful woman in her 50s, asked us each to describe the current conflict from our perspective. When my wife's turn came, she presented a sanitized version. She'd created a relationship assessment as a personal exercise. I'd found it and overreacted, and now I was financially punishing her. I listened without interruption. When she finished, I silently placed copies of her scorecard on the coffee table between us. The therapist picked one up, brows rising as she read. "You shared this assessment with friends?" she asked my wife. "It was just venting," my wife insisted. "That doesn't answer my question," the therapist noted calmly. "Yes, I shared it." My wife's voice grew small. "We were all doing it as part of this workshop on relationship equality." The therapist turned to me. "And how did discovering this make you feel?" Initially betrayed, I answered honestly, but my response wasn't about feelings. It was about realignment of expectations. If I'm being evaluated as a 2 out of 10 partner, then I should adjust my contribution accordingly. The session proceeded with uncomfortable revelations. The therapist skillfully uncovered the root issues. My wife's resentment of my higher income despite benefiting from it, her friend's influence on her perception of our marriage, and her fundamental lack of respect for my role in our partnership. "Let me be direct," the therapist said after nearly an hour. "This scorecard reflects profound contempt. Contempt is the single greatest predictor of relationship failure. It's not about the scoring system, it's about the mindset behind it." My wife began crying. I didn't see it that way. I just wanted him to do more. "More than what?" I asked quietly. "I've covered the majority of our expenses for 5 years. I've supported your career changes. I maintain our home. What exactly wasn't enough?" She had no concrete answer, just vague complaints about emotional labor and feeling unheard. The therapist assigned us homework. She was to document specific examples of what she needed, and I was to continue my policy of transparency about financial changes. 3 more sessions followed over the next 2 weeks. In each one, my wife's position weakened as her contradictions emerged. She wanted equality, but expected me to carry the financial burden. She demanded respect but showed none herself. She sought emotional validation but ignored my expressions of emotional need. After our 4th session, we arrived home in silence. She finally spoke as we entered the house. "I understand now why you reacted the way you did," she said. "I wouldn't have tolerated someone treating me the way I treated you." I nodded but waited for more. True accountability requires more than acknowledgement. "The scorecard wasn't just unfair, it was cruel," she continued. "And sharing it with my friends was a betrayal of our privacy. I got caught up in their approval and forgot about respecting you." "And the financial changes I've made?" I asked. She looked down. "They're fair. If I want an equal partnership, I should contribute equally. I just never thought about what that actually meant until the money wasn't there." I gestured toward the living room, and we sat facing each other. "Where do we go from here?" That's your decision to make. You're giving me the choice. Surprise colored her voice. I always have been. The 3 options I laid out still stand with a 4th now added. I leaned forward. Complete reconciliation with redefined terms. What terms? She asked cautiously. First, absolute transparency. No private scorecards. No discussions about our marriage with your friends. Second, financial contribution proportionate to income. Fair, not necessarily equal. Third, mutual respect demonstrated through actions, not just words. And if I agree, then we rebuild not what we had before, something better. I held her gaze steadily. But know this, I will never again accept being undervalued or disrespected. That version of me is gone. She considered this silently. What about the separate accounts, the restricted access? Those remain until trust is rebuilt, however long that takes. Trust isn't an entitlement, it's earned. 2 days later, I received notification that she'd closed her personal checking account and returned to using our newly established joint account, the one requiring dual authorization for major transactions. It was a small gesture, but meaningful actions, not words. That evening, she placed a shredded purple folder in the trash. Another step. I left the workshop group, she told me over dinner, and I told my friends I wouldn't be participating in their husband-bashing sessions anymore. I nodded in acknowledgement. Good decision. 6 months later, our financial partnership had been fully restructured. She contributed proportionally to her income. I maintained the majority of expenses, and every transaction was transparently documented. The power dynamic had shifted not in my favor, but into balance. 1 year after finding her scorecard, I discovered a new document in her desk drawer. Not a scorecard, but a gratitude journal with daily entries about our marriage. One line caught my attention. I never realized the difference between having a provider and having a partner until I almost lost both. The 2 out of 10 provider had evolved into a 10 out of 10 man who knew his worth and would accept nothing less than the respect that worth commanded. My marriage had either been saved or lost in that process. But I had emerged stronger regardless of the outcome, because ultimately the most important scorecard was the one I kept for myself.